If you're building a watch collection, as in you want to have multiple watches that cover you for different situations, you want to start with the basics. You want to get your dive watch, you want to get your dress watch. It's things that you can wear every day and on a regular basis. But eventually that'll get a bit boring, and you want to get something that's a little bit more unique and interesting and fun. And that can often be difficult to find in the affordable price range, especially if you're looking for something that's really innovative and cool. The well-designed watches with interesting complications often cost a lot of money. But one brand that I think does an excellent job at filling this niche is Vario. They produce incredibly intricately designed watches that look great, that have interesting historical cues, and every once in a while they like to really stretch their creative wings with something a little bit quirky, which is what we're going to be taking a look at today in the new Navi Single-Handed Automatic. This is a watch that takes a more laid-back approach to telling the time, but it looks great and just has a really fun, fresh vibe about it. Take a quick look and then we'll jump into it. Hey guys, welcome back to Just the Watch. My name's Dave. I live in Japan and I love to collect affordable watches. And today we're going to be taking a look at a watch from Vario, which is a brand that's based in Singapore where the design was done. However, the watch was actually manufactured here in Japan, which is one thing that I think is really cool. Vario has been doing that more and more with their watches lately, moving some of their production from places like China over here to Japan, which does kind of distinguish them a little bit from a lot of the other micro brands out there. And today we're taking a look at a watch that is definitely not going to be for everyone. I know it would drive my wife absolutely crazy because this is a one-handed watch that you can't really tell the time down to the minute, much less down to the second on. I think Vario has referred to this as a piece of art on your wrist that can give you an approximation of the time. But if you're the kind of guy who doesn't care if you're within 5 to 10 minutes of an appointment start time, this is going to be perfectly fine for you. What I can say is that it's an incredibly unique design, it's very high quality, and again, tons of fun. Let's jump in and take a look at it. First, I do need to mention that this watch was given to me by Vario, which is why you saw the paid promotions flag at the beginning of the video. However, other than the watch itself, I did not receive any additional compensation, nor did Vario have any control over the content of this review. Normally, when you're talking about watches in this price range, the build quality and the specifications play a major role in whether or not the watch is worth getting. And as a consequence, that tends to factor in heavily into a review like this. But in this case, the watch is all about the design. The build quality and specifications are all great for this price point, and we are going to get into that, but we're going to start by looking at what this watch is, and even if it is a watch at all. If your understanding of a watch is an object that allows you to rapidly and accurately tell the time, maybe this isn't a watch. And in fact, I think I've seen Ivan, the owner of Vario, in some places describe this as more of a piece of art that you can wear on your wrist than a timepiece. And because of that, your decision of whether or not to buy this watch is really going to depend on what you're looking for and your tolerance for this kind of thing. But before we go any further, let's talk about how you actually tell the time on this watch. This is a one-handed watch with the minute hand intentionally omitted from the design. So what you're left with is an oversized hour hand that makes one rotation around the dial every 12 hours, just like a standard hour hand would. And so rather than getting your standard hour and minute markers, you have what's essentially a time-telling chart that's been printed around the very extreme outer edge of the dial. There are 12 segments with each hour spelled out within them. And then in the lower portion of each of those segments, there's a further subdivision that divides into 4, which would represent 15-minute divisions of each hour. So if you look at the dial now, you can see that that hour hand is pointed to the 10 o'clock section. It's past the first 15-minute mark, but hasn't hit the second one, which would represent 30 minutes. So if you're trying to read this exactly, it might be 10:20 or maybe 10:23. But realistically, the way you should read this watch and the most accurate you're really going to get with in practical use is to say it's a little bit past 10:15 or it's almost 10:30. And you would just have to be okay with that understanding of the time if you had chosen this watch to wear on a given day. And right off the bat, that's going to drive a lot of people absolutely insane. If you're a very time-oriented person who's always on a tight schedule, this probably isn't going to be working very well for you. Or, if you look at it from another perspective, this watch just might make you a better person. And we'll get to why in just a second. Now, a one-handed watch like this isn't exactly a new concept. They're kind of their own category of watches, and they've been around for a while. And typically they have two primary draws to them. As we've already touched on, one is design. Doing a one-handed watch like this is a very unusual and interesting watch design, and it really allows designers to come up with some very creative ways of displaying the time and doing something that is really unusual. But perhaps the main reason that people turn to a watch like this is to make a conscious effort to be a little bit less time-oriented. If you are the kind of person that is always rushing around and is always stressing about being late and is always checking their watch to look at each passing minute, then wearing a watch like this might be one part of a strategy to remind yourself to maybe let things go a little bit. Because if you check this watch more than once every 5 minutes, you're probably not going to be able to really tell any difference of the time passing. If you start obsessively checking this watch, it's just going to calmly turn to you and say, hey, relax a bit. And if you're already the kind of person who's kind of loose with time and doesn't really care about every passing minute, a watch like this will complement your lifestyle pretty nicely. So the level of appeal of this watch is going to be very dependent on your personality. Now, I wore this watch out a couple days to test it, and most of the time it worked great until it didn't. I tend to be very laid back with the time most of the time, which is another way to say that I tend to procrastinate. And so 95% of the time, I'm great with just having a really kind of rough understanding of what time it is within like a 15-minute range. But as my fellow professional procrastinators know, once you get close to that deadline, you need to know what time it is down to the second in order to hit that. And so as meeting times and deadlines did start approaching, that's when I started finding myself whipping out my cell phone pretty frequently to get a much more accurate understanding of what time it was so that I could manage the next 5 minutes and 37 seconds properly. So that's as much as I'll say about this philosophical aspect of the watch. Let's move on to the next topic, which would be the design and the idea of having something of a piece of art on your wrist. Oh, shoot. Okay, so no joke, I lost track of time and was late for my English class I was supposed to teach. All right, where were we? Design. Right, so from the standpoint of using this watch as primarily an accessory, as, again, a piece of art on your wrist, as a secondary time-telling instrument with your phone being your primary one, in that case, the design elements on this watch do make a strong case for it. The Navi is a nautical-themed timepiece that Vario has had a lot of fun with in the various models that they've put out. Previously, they've done a jumping hour hand version of this watch that featured both a design that's similar to this one and then also one that's a Popeye-themed watch. This watch carries over a lot of the same design elements from previous editions of the Navi, but takes a more minimalist design approach that suits the whole idea of this kind of laid-back, one-handed time-telling instrument. To begin with, the center of the dial is filled with an expansive, wave-like pattern, and when you combine that pattern with the one-handed design of this watch and the very minimalist layout, it really evokes this sense of the vastness of the ocean. In the center portion of the dial, there's a very minimal amount of printing, and when you replace the indexes with this sort of chart around the outside of the dial, you're left with a very open center section that could easily look kind of boring, but to me perfectly fits with the nautical theme of this watch. This ocean-like central section is only interrupted by 3 elements. You've got a very simple printing of the Vario logo at 12 o'clock, an oversized hour hand with a skeletonized circle and point at the tip of it that looks like it could belong to some kind of an old-timey navigational instrument. And then at the 4:30 position, you have an off-center sub-seconds dial, but rather than putting a 60-second scale and a standard second hand on there, which, let's face it, would have been pretty much pointless on a watch designed like this. If you can't tell what time it is down to the minute, there's no reason to know what time it is down to the second. So instead, they took a more creative approach and transformed this instead into what kind of looks like an animated compass. It serves the function of letting you know that the watch is wound and running, which is actually pretty useful. And having that little bit of motion on this otherwise sparse dial gives you something interesting to look at as well, which is pretty fun. Likewise, the very unusual hour markings, which again are kind of this chart-like section on the very outer edge of the dial, have the hours spelled out in a typeface that really fits with this design. Again, to me, this kind of looks like a nautical chart of some time, and again, just really matches well with everything they're going for here. Framing all of this is a fixed knurled bezel, which kind of looks like a porthole on the side of a ship. And this is complemented by a crown that features similar knurling, but is shaped to look sort of like a sailor's hat. So there's so many cool little nods to nautical history and nautical motifs that are worked into the design of this watch. And when you take all of this together and combine it again with this sort of laid-back method of time telling, you get a very cohesive theme with a watch that really evokes this sense of going on a relaxing voyage at sea. The one-handed nature of this watch makes it a very interesting and novel timepiece, and the nautical stylings and color scheme make it a very beautiful and well-designed watch as well. And those two things on their own make for a very compelling package, but this watch has at least one more thing going for it, and that's that it's very well made. Setting it apart from the majority of micro brands on the market, this watch is actually manufactured in Japan, and it's powered by the Japanese Miyota 82S5 automatic movement, which is a very reliable movement, and it's one of the few options available that'll give you that off-centered sub-second hand at 4:30 instead of the standard 6 o'clock position. And while this is one of Miyota's basic movements, it does feature hacking and hand winding, which is always nice to see, although you probably won't use the hacking feature very much on a watch with this design. Surprisingly, this watch also features a full 100 meters of water resistance, which means that this watch is perfectly fine for going swimming if you wanted to take it in the water. However, I don't think that this watch is designed for that purpose. This isn't really a sports watch. I think that water resistance just gives you that extra peace of mind that if you were out sailing and happened to fall into the ocean, your watch would be totally fine. If you did want to take this watch swimming, you definitely want to switch out the strap, because this one came included on one of Vario's newer German leather straps. And if you're not familiar with Vario, they're actually known for making straps almost as much as they are for making watches. They produce some of the most interesting and highest quality straps around, and this German leather watch strap is one of the best stock straps I've ever seen on a watch. It's beautifully designed with high quality stitching and a wonderful taper to it, and the leather is very supple with a soft texture to the top of it. It doesn't require any break in time and just feels great on the wrist. Vario is offering you all of this at the low price of $428, which in my opinion is pretty astounding for this level of quality and customized design. There are so many elements that are unique to this watch, and it's really uncommon to find a watch with this level of character under $500. The only real drawbacks to this watch are that it is kind of a niche appeal. A lot of people, if not most people, are probably going to be driven crazy by the lack of a minute hand, but that's not a flaw in the watch, that's the watch's main feature. It really just comes down to whether or not you're the kind of person who will appreciate that, or if it's just going to drive you up the wall. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up for today. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is this the kind of thing that you could get into? Are you okay not being able to tell the time down to the minute like this? I think everybody already has a cell phone in their pocket as a backup anyways, if you really need to know exactly what time it is. So this is kind of a fun option to wear that I think, wouldn't be too impractical most days. I've definitely enjoyed getting to review it, but would love to hear what you guys think down below. If you're interested in getting this watch, you can pick it up from Vario on their website. I'll leave a link to them down below in the description. And if you're interested in getting a watch themed t-shirt like this one, you can pick it up at justthewatch.com. That will wrap it up for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.